They say you don't really know your family until there's money involved. Let me tell you something, baby, I didn't even have to die before I found that out. But I did die. A week before the reading. Quiet, early morning, just me and the robins outside. I slipped out this world with my head on my pillow and my porch light still on. I suppose if heaven has screen doors and coffee that don't go cold, I'll be just fine. But that morning, the one where everything started to burn, that was the will reading. And Lord have mercy, it was beautiful. The lawyer's office was too cold, like they were trying to stop people from getting emotional. One of those new places dressed up like it got character, but it's all laminate floors and fake crown molding. I'd been in there twice while I was alive, once to change the will, and once to make sure nobody could change it back. Monday morning after my funeral, they all came dressed nice. Tasha in some high-necked beige thing like she just stepped off a magazine shoot. Marcus in his tailored gray suit, probably the same one he wore to beg donors at work. Joylene had the nerve to come with oversized sunglasses on in an office, like we wouldn't see her eyes rolling behind them. Harold sat in the corner, quiet, didn't even take a seat at the main table, just nodded at folks and found himself a corner chair near the coat rack. He was wearing that same corduroy blazer he always wore to church, the one with the elbow patches and a ripped pocket someone stitched up by hand. Not me, but I know who did. The lawyer, young, nervous, sweating like a glass of lemonade in July, opened the folder slow, like maybe if he turned the pages soft enough, nobody would argue. He started reading what was expected. Jewelry Toignet, Joylene's girl. I knew she'd pawn it in 6 months, but it was still mine to give. A donation to Sister Eunice's food bank. Of course, some savings to be split 3 ways between the children. All clear so far. Then he got to the house. That's it, the lawyer said, clearing his throat and fumbling the page. That's it for personal accounts and assistances. Now, regarding the matter of the property at 221 Maple. Silence. You could have heard air stop. The house and all its contents, as well as the deed to the adjoining lot to the east, are hereby transferred to Mr. Harold L. Harmon. It got quieter than quiet after that. Patricia, the daughter-in-law from Caleb's second marriage, let out this tiny, shocked half-laugh, like she couldn't believe what she heard. Harold shifted in his chair but didn't speak. He just looked down at his hands, one thumb running over the old wedding band he never took off. His wife passed 10 years ago, but Harold never remarried. He was the type to love once and long. Joylene made that teeth-sucking sound I used to scold her for. Marcus sat perfectly still. Only a scratch of his jaw gave him away. Tasha. That baby clapped. Just twice, but it was sharp, like she was watching someone win a prize on game night. Everyone turned to her, and she dropped her hands in her lap like nothing happened. But I saw it, and more importantly, Marcus saw it. His jaw ticked again. The lawyer kept going, flipping pages with shaky fingers. I wish I could have handed him a glass of water or told him it wasn't his fault. He was just the messenger. And baby, the message was divine. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why'd I do it? Give my whole house, the house I scrubbed floors in, raised babies in, buried my gym out of? Why give that to a neighbor? Let me take you back. Not all the way. Just a little before the fall. Before the knock. Before the one moment that made the world tilt, just enough to see who was standing where. 6 months earlier, I was still up every morning before the stove warmed. I liked the quiet. Garden was blooming just fine that spring. Bright azaleas coming up around the porch. Little green tomatoes poking out like promises. I thought life was simple then. I had my Medicare check, my books, my hummingbirds. I didn't mind the solitude. You get to a certain age, you stop begging people to show up for you. You just open the door and see who comes through. Matter of fact, the last family supper I'd hosted was on a Sunday in March. Joylene brought store-bought cornbread and lied about baking it. Marcus didn't even take off his Bluetooth earpiece. Said he was on call. And Caleb came late, then left early, smelling like Versace and decisions I didn't ask about. Harold came after. He brought a peach cobbler still warm under the foil. And when I said he didn't have to bring nothing, he smiled and said, "Didn't want you thinking you ain't worth it." I froze for a second. Not because of what he said, but because it had been so long since somebody looked me in the eye when they handed me anything. Harold never overstepped, never sad if I didn't invite him. But that day, when I asked if he'd like some sweet tea on the porch, he said, "Yes, ma'am," and folded himself into one of those rocking chairs like he'd always belonged there. We didn't say much. I think good companionship knows the tune don't always need words. Now, let me tell you something you might not know unless you're about my age. Silence. Silence can be a comfort, but it can also be the loudest judgment you've ever heard. That week, I had a dizzy spell. Nothing major. Just stood up too fast in the kitchen. Caught myself on the counter, heart thudding like anger in my chest. Thought about calling Joylene. She lived 15 minutes away. Thought about texting Caleb. He's always posting pictures of protein shakes and hustle quotes. Figured he might take a break to check if his mama was sprawled on a tile floor. But I didn't call. I opened the screen door, let the air in, waited for that feeling to pass. It did. But the truth stayed. The knowing. The way you know when someone forgets your birthday, but worse, when they remember and don't care. A week later, Harold mowed my lawn without asking. I had planned to get to it that Friday, but he did it on a Wednesday. When I thanked him, he waved it off like it was nothing. "Grass don't care about calendars," he said. That man always had a way of saying simple things like scripture. Now, I need you to pay attention here. Because what happened next, about a month later, is where everything turns. It was a Wednesday morning. The sun didn't wait for me to catch up. I'd just finished washing up, still had my slippers on, and I went to grab the broom off the wall hook in the kitchen. I slipped. Body went down fast, but landing went slow. Pain bloomed in my side like heat across concrete. I couldn't scream. Didn't want to believe it, but I couldn't move. I remember the sound of the fridge humming. I remember the smell of lemon oil from the floor. I remember calling Marcus first, straight to voicemail. Then Joylene, the phone rang 4 times. Then nothing. Caleb didn't even have a voicemail set up. So I laid there, trying not to cry, thinking about casseroles and funerals. And then I dragged myself to the back door, inch by inch, elbows first, then palms, then pawing the bottom of the screen door like a cat trying to get in, only I was trying to get out. Managed to knock on the divider wood, just 3 times. Didn't call his name, couldn't. But 15 seconds later, Harold opened his door. No shirt, just pajama pants and worry. He said nothing when he saw me. Just knelt, arms under my back, and lifted me like I didn't weigh anything except a history. Carried me back inside, set me on the couch with a pillow. Called 911, sat beside me until the medics came. Ran back to get his reading glasses and filled out the intake forms when I couldn't hold the pen. Now tell me, if that was you, who would you will your home to? Folks who let your bones rattle on cold tile? Or the man who reached you before your call ever went out? That was the day I changed my will. By the time they rolled me into the ambulance, Harold had already called Caleb for me. Left a message so calm, so surgical, you'd think he'd rehearsed it. Morning, Miss Ora Mae had a fall. EMTs are taking her in now. She says she'll be fine, but you should know. Caleb called me back 3 hours later. Said he'd just woken up. Then had the nerve to ask, "You good?" It wasn't the words. It was the tone. Casual. Lazy. Like he was checking the score on a game he forgot he bet on. I said I was fine, of course. Because some answers ain't for them, they're for you. Joylene texted. Just a thumbs up emoji and keep me posted. You ever held your side in pain and stared at a screen wondering if raising a child really meant anything? I laid in that hospital bed, tubes running like veins on the outside instead of the inside, and I remembered a moment. Marcus, age 12, climbing in bed with me after Jim's funeral. Tucked his little body into mine and whispered, "I'm not gonna leave you. Ever." That promise must have spilled out with the last good rain, 'cause that boy didn't come to the hospital at all. The nurse scolded me on the third day for trying to reach the bathroom by myself. Called me fierce like that was a compliment. Harold came every day. Brought crossword puzzles, grapes in Ziploc bags, even remembered I liked mine in the fridge first, so they got that crunch. I didn't ask him for any of it. You ever had someone love you without needing to explain why? One morning, he came in with a plain brown envelope. Set it by the window. Didn't say a word about it. Just poured me water, pulled the blinds, and sat. When he left, I opened it. Inside, every bill I'd missed. Paid stamped in red. Utilities. Mortgage insurance. Even a small hardware invoice I didn't recognize. I called the number on the bottom. The lady said, "Oh, Mr. Harmon handled that weeks ago. He never told me." That's the day I took a pen and added one final clause to my will. I hadn't planned on giving him the whole house at first. Just a small grant, maybe the truck if it was still running when I passed. But what do you give someone who shows up every single time? Who chooses you again and again without needing notice or applause? You give them your home. Your name, your last word. Not everyone's gonna understand that. Especially not people who've spent their lives trading holiday visits for Instagram posts and calling it care. I'd made my decision. But I hadn't seen them all in one room since. Not until my own funeral. The Sunday after I passed, Sister Erlene told me it was the biggest turnout she'd seen since Father Prestian's sweeping heart took him in the middle of his benediction. Joylene wore a black gown a size too tight. Kept pulling at the sleeves like mourning was uncomfortable. Marcus made the most perfect speech. Choked up, voice shaking. Talked about what kind of mother I was. How much I meant. Everybody clapped. Some folks cried. Tell you a secret, though. Guilt's got a rhythm you can't fake. And Marcus? He was off tempo from the moment he hugged the preacher. Caleb sat in the fourth pew, not even with the family. I noticed that. He said later it was for space. But the real storm came the next day. That we'll read in the one I told you about, where I gave my last gift. And they hated it. After the lawyer read it, Tasha pulled out her phone without care. "Excuse me," she said, standing. "I just need to make one quick call. Well, a few." Joylene reached for her purse like the documents were contagious. "You can't be serious," she said to the lawyer. Then to Marcus, lower. She left the house to that man. Marcus didn't speak, just swallowed once and blinked too fast. I could see it all, how fast he was racing through years in his head, wondering when he got edged out by a quiet man with a mower. Gordon, Joylene's husband, the one who never liked coming to family gatherings unless steak was involved, leaned forward. "Is this legal?" he asked. "It don't feel legal." The lawyer, bless his nervous little soul, nodded and tapped the documents. It was notarized last month. Her signature matcha's witnesses are listed. It's airtight. Was she even in her right mind? Joylene asked. She said it like a question, but the tone was an accusation. That was the cue. Marcus finally spoke. He stood, adjusted his cuff, and said, "No, don't do that." He didn't raise his voice, didn't cry. But if you've ever heard pain wrapped in politeness, you know how sharp it cuts. My mama didn't lose her mind. Y'all lost her trust. Joylene blinked. Caleb leaned back like he was clocking out of a shift he didn't want to be on anyway. She could barely walk on her own 6 weeks ago, Joylene said, reaching again. We were going to help. You had 6 weeks. Marcus looked at her. You had 60 years. And that's how I knew I made the right choice. 'Cause see, Marcus isn't evil. He's tired. He spent a lifetime trying to keep everything together for the family, only to be outpaced by folks who don't even remember favorite desserts or the kind of lotion you keep by the bedside. So when he finally looked over at Harold, really looked at him, and said, Did she talk to you about this? That wasn't anger. That was grief. Harold stood slowly, not defensive, just present. She didn't ask permission. He said, didn't need to. Then he picked up the folder with the deed, nodded once to the lawyer, and walked out of the room with the quiet of a man who didn't apologize for love. Now, I want you to sit with that a minute. I want you to ask yourself, what kind of love moves silently but leaves everything standing in its shadow? Because after the will reading, the calls came to the lawyer, to the county office, to estate planners who wore cologne too loud and promises too thin. But the papers stood. And when Marcus came by the house 3 days later, just stood out front by the gravel path, Harold stepped onto the porch, looked down at him for a long time, then turned the porch light on. Didn't say a thing. Didn't need to. That light stayed on until sunrise. Legacy don't always come dressed in silver and china sets passed down with dust on the edges. Sometimes it comes wrapped in cobbler and calloused hands. My house went to a man who came when I needed someone most. They laughed at the funeral. They cried at the reading. Let me show you why. But first, I gotta take you further back to the first betrayal, the first brunch where I knew who I really was to them. That's where this all truly begins. It was a Sunday afternoon, 2 months before I fell. The kind of day where the sky can't decide whether it wants to rain or shine, so it just sits heavy. Air thick enough to press prayers deeper into your chest. I had called the family 3 times in 1 week, trying to plan a simple dinner. Nothing big. Just roast chicken, greens, cornbread, maybe banana pudding if I had the energy. Joylene didn't call back. She texted, should be able to come. Depends on work. Caleb said he had plans, but might swing by. Marcus asked if he could bring Tasha. I said of course, but I won't lie and say the words didn't taste like caution on my tongue. She had a presence like perfume too strong, sweet when you first breathe it in, but nothing about it stays soft. Sunday came. I set the table with the good plates. Not the china, but the ones Jim and I bought after our 20th anniversary, cream with the little blue ivy around the edge. I'd wiped dust off them twice while waiting for somebody to ask. They pulled up late. Caleb first, loud music, louder clothes, hugged me, one-armed like he was clocking in at a job. Tossed his coat over the back of the dining chair, didn't even ask where to hang it. Said something about finally watching Ozarks, kissed my cheek, and went straight to my fridge like it was his second apartment. Marcus came in next, flowers in hand, late but apologetic. I could tell by the way he pressed them into my hand he hadn't picked them himself, and that the apology was mostly for being born into a house he didn't know how to love properly. Tasha followed close. Hair slicked, makeup polished to a degree you could see the effort first. Her voice was sugarcane soaked in cold tea, polite, but not warm. "This place is so charming," she said, walking into the kitchen without being invited, peeking at my cast iron skillet like it was something she figured should have been retired. Caleb helped himself to my remote control, flipped through until he found basketball, then turned the volume down like that was supposed to be a kindness. Joylene didn't show. Didn't call either. I served the plates, watched them eat. They complimented the chicken, praised the crust on the cornbread. Tasha even asked for the banana pudding recipe, the way you ask someone to feel neighborly, not because you're going to write it down. But it was Marcus who made the first mistake. "You should really think about getting a Ring camera," he said between bites. "Neighborhood's changing." I looked at him and set my fork down slow. "This neighborhood's been changing for 50 years, Marcus." I stated. He gave a tight laugh, without teeth. "I just mean, for safety. You're alone out here." I tilted my head, watched him twist himself into concern. "Funny thing about being alone," I said, "it don't start when people leave. It starts when they're still around, but they stop showing up." Tasha's eyes flashed then, curious, a little cautious. "You're not suggesting we've been neglectful, are you, Miss Ora Mae?" She used my full name like she'd earned it. I smiled, cut a piece of roast chicken, chewed slow before I spoke. "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm living it." That shut the table quiet for a breath too long. It was Caleb who broke it. "You know what I do love, though?" he said, mouth still full. "That Harold guy. The one next door. Man helped me jump my car last month. Solid dude." Tasha raised her brows but didn't speak, just flicked her eyes over to Marcus. "I didn't know you talked to Harold," I said, not accusing, just surprised. Caleb shrugged and reached for another biscuit. I saw him outside while I was headed over to Joylene's. Needed a jump? He didn't ask no questions. Just pulled the cables out like he had them ready for me. "That's Harold," I said. Marcus cleared his throat. "It's great that he helps, but it's also not his responsibility. We should be doing more. We really should." Tasha reached under the table for Marcus's hand, but I could see him tense. That woman came wrapped in ambition, and he was too tired to hold its weight quietly forever. "I appreciate the food," she said, "but have you given any thought to what happens if, God forbid, something happens to you?" The silence that sat after that made the weather feel hotter. "What happens to me?" I asked. "I just mean, with the house. The land, it's a lot for one person. If things aren't in place, it gets messy. Unnecessarily messy." I looked down at my plate, watched gravy settling like old memories, then looked up. "Things are in place," I said. "They just ain't where y'all think they are." No one said much after that. Caleb left first. Long hug. Promised to call. He didn't. Tasha pulled Marcus out early, excused it as prepping for a work thing. He looked back on the porch, wanted to say something. Maybe he didn't have the words. They drove off, and the porch felt colder even though the sun hadn't gone down yet. Maybe 20 minutes later, Harold came by, brought me a little basket with some store peaches and newspaper clippings folded into triangles. He heard their car from his garden. Probably saw them talking on the sidewalk after Tasha had wild hands when she was mad. The silhouettes had said enough. We sat in the rockers. He didn't ask what was said. I didn't offer. Just watch the purple sky creep like morning over the trees. You ever get tired? I asked him. Harold didn't look away from the street. Tired? Of showing up? Of being good when folks don't care back? He was quiet for a beat. You don't show up for folk because they notice, he said. You do it because you couldn't sleep at night if you didn't. You ever hear a thing you weren't ready for? My eyes burned, but I blinked it back. I still had pie to wash, and grief that needed folding neatly for another time. Why do you do it? I asked. Harold turned to me, voice softer than old sweaters. Because somebody should. The porch light flickered. Not from the bulb, but from something larger. From the piece of me that was still halfway willing to believe in people who hadn't earned it. That night, I sat in bed and wrote in my journal. Just one line. If they ask what changed me, tell them no one ever showed up but Harold. And maybe one person should be enough. There wasn't no thunder that morning. No voice from the clouds or a crow circling overhead like in the books. Just a coffee pot dripping slow and a sparrow fussing in the tree out back. That's the thing about the moments that change your life. They don't always arrive loud. Sometimes they sneak in while you're reaching for the broom. I was in the kitchen, same flow I always had. Socks on, not shoes, because they made too much noise on the tile. I got the music playing, old Sam Cooke humming low from my phone. Left near the window for better signal. I stepped left, bent down to grab the dustpan, and time bent with me. My foot slid, hit one of those rags I'd laid down the night before to soak up a spill. The rag that never got picked up because I was tired and told myself I'd do it in the morning. Funny how the smallest things do the most permanent damage. When I hit the floor, everything else kept moving. The kettle kept whistling. The fridge buzzed, like always. Sam Cooke just kept singing, like nothing in the world had changed. But my body told a different story. My hip screamed before my mouth could. Pain like lightning running down bone, biting through old muscle and newer regrets. I couldn't get up. I tried though. Lord help me, I tried. Pushed against the floor with my palms, but the kitchen spun like I was on a boat in a bad storm. Sweat broke out down my back and under my arms like I was standing in the sun. But it was cold, cold as my mama's old basement when the power went out in winter. I laid there for a moment, still, breathing shallow as I could to keep from crying out. And then I reached for my phone. I shouldn't have had to scroll so far to find my own children. Started with joy. 2 rings. 3, 4. Please leave your message. I hung up. Caleb next. Straight to voicemail. Then Marcus. He picked up. Mama, he said, voice sharp like maybe he'd been worried. Relief hit me hard. Baby, I whispered. I'm in a meeting, he snapped. Can I call you back? Then the click. Baby, when I tell you. I stared at that little glass screen like it had slapped me. I could feel my fingers shaking. Couldn't even hold the phone again till I wiped them on my robe. And by then, my whole body felt like concrete. My leg was going numb and I couldn't sit up. I laid flat, looking at the ceiling. I remember that old stain in the corner, the one I'd been meaning to paint over. And that's when I cried. Not from pain, not even from fear. From understanding. Realizing I wasn't a priority, pride kept me from calling Harold, but I had no choice. Crawling to the door, I knocked, and Harold responded. He helped me inside, called 911, and sat with me without prying. As tears flowed, Harold offered silent support. The EMTs arrived, and Harold promised to visit later. That night, the hospital revealed physical injuries and emotional truths. Marcus texted, Caleb apologized, but Joylene stayed silent. Harold brought a book and ginger ale. No words, just sat. I stared at the ceiling till the nurse came and asked if he was family. Yes, I said. Didn't blink. Didn't hesitate. Yes. The next morning, I called my lawyer. Told him to come see me. He asked if it could wait. I said no. They wheeled him into my hospital room that Friday, briefcase, and sweat on his forehead. I told him, I want to amend the will. He reached for a pen. I'm leaving the house to my neighbor. Name's Harold Harmon. He paused, looked at me. I looked back. Yeshua, I'm alive, ain't I? That man walked into my house when my children ignored the call. He sat with me through shame and stillness. He's the one who'll light the porch when I'm gone. That's who gets the deed. They discharged me on a Tuesday morning. Hospitals love to send you home when the sky's gray and the halls are half empty. Like it makes up for everything you went through inside. They wheeled me out in one of those plastic chairs, even though I told the nurse I could walk just fine. She smiled like people do when they've already made the decision for you. Harold was waiting in the drive. Engine running, window down, gospel humming saw from the radio, but low enough not to disturb the moment. Morning, he said, like it wasn't a whole new season. My hands were still trembling. Not just from the pain meds, but from what I knew I'd find waiting for me. An empty house, a quiet phone, and eyes that had read what happened like it was a weather report instead of a cry for something deeper. Harold stepped out, opened my door, helped me in slow. We didn't say much on the ride home. But silence with him never felt like absence. It felt like space. When we pulled into my driveway, I saw it. Sitting on the porch rail, right next to my old rocking chair. A single rose. In a mason jar. The water inside was chilled, like someone had pulled it straight from the fridge. And tied around the jar's mouth was one piece of jute twine, frayed at the edge. No note, just the gesture. Deep red, full bloom. Not the kind of rose you buy by the dozen. This one was picked. Chosen. I looked at Harold without asking. He looked straight ahead. They charge you much for parking? He asked. And that said everything. He carried my little overnight bag, planted it by the door, and for the first time, didn't follow me in. I'll be back later. Food if you want it. I blinked at the porch rail. Harold, I asked, real gentle. He paused on the bottom step. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. He didn't nod, didn't wave, just tipped his chin like he'd been waiting his whole life to hear it and wasn't going to cheapen it with too many words. Then he left, and I stood there alone with that rose. The house smelled like time had passed without noticing me. Old furniture air, leftover black-eyed pea, scent stale in the corners. My Afghan still half folded on the couch, like it got tired. I sat in the chair next to my usual one, avoiding my hip barking. I replayed the fall and the after. The silence. Marcus never came. Joylene never spoke. Her curiosity led her to Sister Geraldine, a clerk at the courthouse who spilled the beans. It's a mess. No one talks anymore. Just kind of feels like they have no choice but to follow the truth, even when it's difficult. It's 3 weeks since Joylene checked in. We sit in silence, not wanting to talk about anything, even though it's obvious something happened. In a way, she wanted love, and what she got was more questions. Marcus arrives unsure about anything, looking for truth, not knowing if the will changed. But what else would it be? He feels guilty, but he doesn't want to argue. They sat in silence for 2 whole minutes, waiting for the guilt to fade away before he leaves. It's too late now, but what if we told the truth? What if we knew everything was a mess? What if we could face it? What if we didn't want to chase after the truth for the sake of others? What if we could accept who we are, even when things are twisted with guilt and fear? What if we didn't need those things to be happy? What if we cared less what others think? What if, just what if, I'd already died in small ways 100 times? Every lonely supper, every voicemail unanswered, every lecture about downsizing, every squeezing visit like I was an errand. Harold wasn't trying to save me. He just didn't let me drown without reaching in. I changed, I said. Marcus nodded. Didn't push. Didn't chase. But his mouth curved as he looked down at the rose. You pick that? He asked. I smiled. No, but I kept it. He stood slow. You need anything? I need rest. He nodded, eyes staying on the porch rail. Call me, he said. If I fall again? I asked, cool as moonlight. Call me anyway, he said. And this time maybe he meant it. That night I opened the armoire. Pulled out the will. Not the one the lawyer had filed. The one I kept extra. The copy I read to myself whenever I needed to remember that I had a choice. I read it in full. Right down to the line about leaving the house to Harold, the adjacent land for a future community garden, and a trust fund that releases for my grandchildren if they earn it, and not because they share my blood. Then I took out my journal and wrote one line under the date. This ain't about revenge. It's about clarity. The rose sat in that mason jar 7 full days. Fresh, crisp, vibrant, like it was still tethered to earth by more than just water. On the 8th day, I opened the jar, poured the water out into my orchids, and pressed the petals flat between Psalm 91 and the back cover of my Bible. You know why? Because love, real love, don't wilt when it's noticed. It becomes part of the legacy. There was a certain kind of quiet that settled on my house after the will got filed. Not the peaceful kind, not the kind that folds into the pillow and lets you breathe easy. No, not that. This one sat in corners, lingered under light switches, the kind of quiet that made walls feel like they were listening. I was back on my feet, more or less. Hips sore, steps slower, but I'd learned how to move through the ache. Part of me always had. Women like me, we've been walking through pain so long we lace it up like it's part of the outfit. What I couldn't move through was Marcus's voice. I just want to understand, he said one afternoon, sitting across from me with that planner bag still looped on his shoulder, like he was ready to leave as soon as he got what he came for. It's not about money. I swear, it's the legacy. I blinked slow. No, baby, it's about the house. You're just dressing it up. He had the decency to drop his eyes. Do you think he deserves it more than us? You want the short answer or the one with context? I saw him bristle. If you're going to call me ungrateful, just say it. Boy, I said gently, if the shoe didn't fit, you wouldn't be arguing barefoot. He stood too fast. Hands rubbed his neck like my words slapped him before he could dodge them. I loved Daddy too. This place? It's got his hands in every wall. I let his words settle before I reached for the thing I'd been meaning to show him for months. I pulled the drawer from under the coffee table. Inside, a letter. Yellowed, still sealed. I found this going through Daddy's things, I said. Almost 20 years late. He stared at the envelope, at the handwriting just barely faded from age. He wrote you the night before he passed. You're just now reading it. I tapped my chest. Some doors only open when you're ready. He nodded, unsure of what he'd just walked into, then left, quieter than usual. After he left, I opened that letter. And baby, Jim knew me better than I thought. **** May. If you're reading this, I'm already gone. I don't like writing things I can't say, but I'm not strong like you are. I never told you this because I was scared. Not of you, but of how much I needed you. That never faded, you know. Not once. You were the center of all the best parts of me. If the years ahead ever do you wrong, I hope someone shows up who knows how to hold space the way you do. Someone who don't run from your silence, who waters your stories and don't call 'em weeds. If he finds you, and I think he will, I hope you see him. I hope you let somebody see you again. Love. Jim ****. I pressed the letter to my chest. Didn't cry. Didn't flinch. Just sat there wondering if that rose in the mason jar came from seeds Jim planted long before Harold ever picked one. Later that same day, Aunt Shine came tapping at my back door like she always did when the wind changed directions. She never knocked proper, just tapped the glass with one of them acrylics and waited like the queen of biblical warnings. "You got something stewing?" she said as soon as she walked in. "I can smell it over the cornbread." I ain't cooking. I meant your spirit. She sat down, unzipped her pocketbook, lit a peppermint like it was a cigarette, and got comfortable. "I heard about the will." "Of course you did." "And I heard about Harold." I raised a brow. "What about him?" She looked me deep in the face, like only an older sister could. "You remember back when Jim was still here, and y'all got that new neighbor next door? The quiet boy. Heart too big for his own chest. Harold. First time he showed up at that garage sale with them gardening gloves too clean and a bag of peaches too ripe." I smiled. He wore a button-up in 92-degree heat. She leaned in. "Jim knew." "Knew what?" She licked her peppermint slow. "That Harold was sweet on you from day one." I laughed. Loud. Honest. "Shine, stop." She was dead serious. "Your husband wasn't blind. He'd seen a man starve before. He knew the way Harold looked at a hot meal and a woman who smiled at him like he mattered. Jim ain't ever said a word. 'Cause he trusted you. And he trusted that if anything ever did happen to him, that man next door would never let you slip out of reach." I didn't say nothing at first. Then I whispered, "All these years, you think I didn't see Harold seeing me?" "No," she said. "I think you felt it. You just didn't think you earned it twice." That sat heavy. "And right?" She stood up. Peppermint gone. "You got maybe one more shot to tell that man what he already knows. Don't die with questions in the air." Then she kissed my cheek and left like she'd never been there. That evening, I sat on the porch. Same chair, same old cushion. Sun was loud before it slipped, and the wind nudged the hydrangeas like they were eavesdropping. Harold came out 5 minutes after, like we shared an unseen clock. He waved. I waved back. He stepped across the lawn, slow. Stopped at the steps. "You mind?" "Course not." He sat. Hands folded, quiet again. "You all right?" I asked. He nodded. "You?" I stared at the flower bed. At a single weed standing like it had pride. I got things blooming that don't belong anymore. He nodded again. Sometimes that's just old seeds taking their time. "You ever regret staying next door all these years?" He thought too long before answering. "No, not once." Then silence. Comfortable but heavy. I opened my mouth twice before I picked the right words. I found a letter from Jim. Harold didn't shift much, but his hands stilled. Said if someone showed up, someone who saw me, that I should recognize it. Harold breathed in through his nose, looked at the railing. And then he said real quiet, I didn't mean to stay, you know? Just never found a good enough reason to leave. That's when I knew. He'd been waiting for an invitation I'd never offered. And part of me had hoped he'd never stop waiting. I put your name on that deed, I said. I know. No one else would have carried me, Harold. No one else did. He stood, tipped his head like a farewell, like a promise, and walked back across the lawn. And I knew. Some people love you soft, and some people love you quiet. But if you're lucky, somebody loves you without ever needing to be heard. I signed the final version on a Thursday morning. The air was crisp, wind acting like it had somewhere to be. I lit a cinnamon candle just because something about the scent made me feel steady, anchored. I'd already swept the front porch, wiped down all the picture frames. It was the kind of morning where things felt inevitable. My lawyer, Mr. Randall, sat across the kitchen table in his navy vest and corduroy slacks, breathing shallow like I was about to commit a crime instead of cement a decision. You sure about this? He asked again. Randall, I said while pouring his coffee, you've asked me that 3 times. If I was going to change my mind, I'd have done it before I baked biscuits. He laughed, but it was tight. The kind of laugh a man gives when he knows this ain't gonna blow over quiet. I flipped to the last page, the one where my name sat by itself on one side and Harold's rested clean on the other. My pen hesitated for half a breath. But hesitation didn't mean regret. It meant measure. People confuse those two. I don't. I signed. Quick. With purpose. Like pulling a bandage from a wound I was finally letting breathe. Randall slid the paperwork into a manila envelope, sealed it with a neat press down the edge, and folded his hands in his lap. And he said what no one else had the grace to. He was there when they weren't. That matters. It does, I said. But we both knew it was more than that. It wasn't just about presence. It was the way Harold never needed to be noticed for it. That night, someone tried to break the lock on the mailbox. It wasn't a big thing. Just the edge, scratched like somebody had jammed a key that didn't quite fit. The kind of intrusion folks could chalk up to a mail carrier's mistake or a kid pulling pranks. But I'd lived on this street long enough to know when something didn't sit right. I checked the latch. Still clicked clean, but something about it buzzed in my chest. And I knew someone was trying to check for proof before the papers set the concrete. Who? Well, that answer came the next day in $12 heels and last season's designer purse. Joylene. She didn't come to talk. She came to threaten. She arrived at noon, like a tax collector, uninvited and dressed in polished grief. Mama Mae, she said, as if sugar could coat spoiled milk. She stepped in without waiting, eyes scanning the house like she was already cataloging antiques for auction. You got a minute? That depends, I said. Is today the day you apologize, or is it something different? She blinked, adjusted her bag strap. I'd like to discuss some things regarding the family property. I raised a brow. You mean my home? She smiled, but her teeth didn't show. You once said you hoped to keep things in the family. I believe there's room to revisit that intention, especially if you've recently made updates. There it was. The pause before the word updates said everything. She'd heard. Someone had heard, from a courthouse whisper, from a cousin, From somebody who loved a little too much gossip with their greens. She didn't even deny it. You changing the will? Look, I understand emotions have been high. But legally speaking, if someone could argue diminished to capacity, I stopped her right there. Say that again, I said. Out loud. She paused. If someone could prove there was confusion or cognitive lapse, they could contest a major transfer of property. I exhaled slow, long, and deep enough to reach into my spirit. I buried my husband, raised my children, paid off this house with my hands and half my joy, took care of his mother when she forgot her own name, and fed my own across 3 decades of Wednesday dinners and emergency laundries. But you want to say today's the day I lost my mind. Her face hardened. All I'm saying is, there are options. I could help you clean this up before it becomes difficult. Clean, I repeated. Like me, loving somebody enough to gift him peace was a stain she needed to scrub. I stepped forward, closer. You can fax all the paperwork you want, Beatty, but those documents are filed, witnessed, and sealed by the same God that allowed me to fall, and then sent my neighbor to lift me. She didn't blink. But she did leave. Didn't take the steps in heels. Walked across the grass like she'd forgotten her place, like the sidewalk was too narrow for what she was scheming to carry. That evening, Harold came around again. Brought a plate, catfish, still crispy under foil. He tried not to look mad, but I saw it in his shoulders. He knew someone had been by. He always knew. You all right? He asked, like he was asking the house more than me. Peachy, I said, offering a tight smile. Some folks visited with opinions, that's all. He shook his head. Folks don't want peace. They want power over peace. I paused, hand still on the takeout plate. Why haven't you asked me? I said. He looked up. Asked you what? Why I did it? Why I gave you the house? He cleared his throat, looked away, then answered, 'Cause you wanted it to go where it'd be loved, not where it'd be leveraged. My throat caught, because the truth, that was it. Wrapped in 12 words and his grable soft voice. He stood, brushing off imaginary dust from his flannel. I ain't trying to be no savior, Miss May. I just didn't want you to think you were alone. 'Cause you weren't. Not for 1 second. And then he left. Not like someone exiting, like someone making space for air to return. I filed the final letter the next day. Not for Harold. Not for the kids. But for me? For my mother? For every woman who'd ever held down a house only for it to be handed off like a check from a savings account. Under the notes to executor, I wrote one last line in print so clear it looked typed. This home goes to the person who stayed, not the ones who showed up only to measure what it's worth. And under my signature, I added one more sentence. If they contest, remind them I called 3 times. You can feel lightning in the air before it strikes. Your bones ache, your breath shifts. Something inside starts packing things up. Memory, faith, restraint. Like it knows a storm's about to move through your life and rearrange your furniture without permission. That's what the air felt like 2 Sundays after I signed everything. The wind wasn't strong, but it was awake. Tapping at windows, brushing lace curtains like it wanted to whisper a warning. I was seated at the table, recounting dates in the midst of noise. I often rediscovered old calendars, examining people's calistries, forgotten birthdays, and dates of when they stopped caring. Grabbing a kitchen drawer, I found a torn piece of paper with no envelope or date, but my name written neatly. It was Joylene's writing. Gently, I tucked the note away, thinking it might be an old thank you or loss list. Instead, my fingers unfolded it, reading only 4 lines. I realized it was Joylene's plan to distract me while they tried to alter the title on a deed they no longer valued. No emotions, no details, merely a strategic plan. It wasn't Joylene that broke me. I expected her sweetness from her. The one who harmed me was Marcus, my son. The one who cared for me when Jim worked long hours, cried for his first science fair, and nearly disowned himself. They tried to steal his legacy without acknowledging his worth. I remained silent, making no sound when he walked towards the porch, carrying a brown paper azalea starter wrapped in string. He stood calmly, not pushing or fighting, just uneasy. Following him with my gaze, I sensed he was acknowledging and accepting something I'd never expected. To heal, we must accept what's ours. He whispered. I didn't ask why he seemed uneasy. Instead, I rested my head on my hand, listening to the birds. He stepped back to the porch, wouldn't come up, wouldn't sit. Years ago. Not often, not long, but when Jim got sick near the end, he started giving me instructions. Library cards, bank slips, letters. I nodded. I'd known Jim kept records. He wrote like he was preparing for a flood Nancy across town said might never come. He told me, Harold continued, if anything ever went wrong, if the kids forgot who raised them, that you were the legacy, not the land. Tears didn't come. Not yet. What didn't you tell me? I asked. He winced. The trust fund. It doesn't just go to the kids' kids. It has a clause. You added it after his final draft. I sat motionless. The clause where they have to earn it? He nodded. I was there when you told Randall. I just didn't know it was gonna cut so deep. Something inside me ripped. Not because he was wrong. Because he had known that once I made up my mind, I wasn't going to bend again. Why say this now? I asked. Because when I heard you call me family at that hospital, I felt something I haven't let myself feel in 20 years. He stepped up one stair. I felt like maybe I could finally breathe in a place that didn't need me to apologize for it. I stood, slow. Shaking but certain. Harold, you've been my shadow too long to ask if you deserved the light. If you're here now, it ain't because someone handed you a title. It's because I saw you, long before my bones betrayed me. That silence held us both. Then, he reached for my hand, held it like a prayer he was never taught in full. That night, I burned the note. Not out of vengeance, but because it wasn't mine to carry. Marcus had made his choice. Now I would make mine. I called Randall the next morning to add 2 more clauses to the will. 1 for closure. 1 for fire. I wasn't supposed to be there. They called it a legacy dinner. Put my name on paper, printed it in gold flakes like I was furniture getting passed down. A few cousins, council folks, and church deacons, all invited to celebrate Ora Mae Henderson's impact on the community. Nobody told me about it. I found out from Sister Dut, bless her gossipy heart. She waddled across the Piggly Wiggly bakery aisle, waving that flyer like it was a warrant. You going? She asked through a mouthful of lord. Going where? That gala of yours? I stared, slowly taking the paper from her. You mean a dinner, for me, that nobody told me about? She sucked her teeth. I just assumed you was keeping it a surprise from yourself. Turns out it was Joylene who organized it. Under Marcus's name. Used his contacts, used my recipes, even used Jim's old photo, the one from our 25th anniversary cookout, the one I told her not to touch 'cause the frame was cracked. Supposedly to honor the Henderson family legacy. Marcus sent a text the night before. Would love for you to come. Would mean a lot. Like I'd RSVP to my own eulogy. I could have ignored it. Said nothing. Let them dress me up in memory and fold me into a speech Joylene wrote for her next campaign flyer. But I didn't. Because ashes don't argue with fire. We walk through it. Harold pulled up out front at 6 sharp. He had on a black suit I'd never seen before. Fit him like it had waited 30 years to be worn. Pressed sleeves, shined shoes, no tie. Just silence and that look he wore when the soil was right and the season was shifting under you. Yeshua? He asked, resting one hand on the steering wheel. I stared out the window for a second, then nodded. Let's go see what they think legacy means. The hall was dressed like a wedding. Gold runners, white chairs, long banquet table with candles tall enough to melt guilt. I heard them before they saw me. Laughter, clinking, fake gratitude stirring into sweet tea thick with performative sugar. Marcus was mid-conversation when we walked in. He froze. His glass hung in the air just long enough to catch the flicker of shame. Joylene turned next, eyes widening like she hadn't prepared a speech that assumed I'd be home watching Wheel of Fortune. I walked to the center table. Didn't ask. Didn't wait. Took a seat, with Harold behind me like a cliff, blocking the wind. You said you'd love for me to come, I said. So I did. Marcus glanced at Joylene like he needed permission to breathe. She smiled. That soft, slow, split her throat through a hug kind of smile. Well, of course, she said. This night's for you. The pastor stood to give blessings, talked about my legacy of quiet strength, about perseverance, about how nominees for Wisdom Awards should carry my name. They toasted. They clapped. Marcus stood to speak. He looked tired. He started with love, as most lies do. But 3 minutes in, he paused. And for the first time, I saw the boy behind the banker. I was gonna say a lot, he muttered. But I think the only thing that matters is we didn't show up for her, right? Not when it counted. Joylene squeezed his arm, whispering something I chose not to hear. He shook his head. She left the house to the man who came to the door. And that's gonna hurt some folks. But if you ask me, that's justice. Harold didn't blink, didn't smile, just rested a hand flat on the table behind my shoulder, like backup. I stood up slow. The room fell quiet like they knew repentance might be served with dessert. I've been called a lot of things in this town, I said. Mild, predictable, sweet. That one always made me laugh. A few folks chuckled, unsure what direction I was heading. But what most of you didn't know is this. I turned slightly, not for drama, but because the weight shifted in my spine the moment I named it. I watched this family memorize my recipes better than they memorized my voice. Watch me age out of mattering, while they built speeches out of my patience and left my porch light flickering in silence. A woman near the end of the table dabbed a tear. Let me be plain, I said. A legacy ain't what you inherit. It's what you practiced while I was still alive. Joylene stood up sharp. I don't think this is the time. Joylene, I said, smooth and razor-wrapped, you only call things bad timing when they're honest. She sat back down. Tight. Face froze so hard I thought it might crack. I nodded at the dessert table. Y'all enjoy the peach cobbler. That's my last recipe for this bunch. And then I turned and walked out, Harold right behind me. Didn't look back. didn't thank anyone. Didn't feel guilty? 'Cause you don't make peace with people who've replaced the sound of your voice with the sound of their own applause. That night, Harold didn't go home. He sat on the porch with me. Didn't say much. But when the solar lantern flickered out at midnight, he got up, climbed the porch step, and changed the battery from his coat pocket without being asked. That's love. Not flowers. Not rings. Presence. And here's what I'll tell you now, because you've walked this far with me. I'm not mad anymore. I was. Back when the fall happened. Back when the silence hurt more than the bruise. Back when pretending I was okay felt like the last gift I had to give. But I'm not anymore. I'm clear. So when the will gives Harold the deed, the land, the title, and the garden next door, know this. It's not punishment. It's prophesy. They gathered at Randall's office like it was a courtroom and I'd done something wrong just by dying. Marcus wore grief like it was tailored, creased and folded, no smudges, not a necktie out of place. He kept fiddling with the folder in his lap, like if he held it long enough, the facts inside would fold to his favor. Caleb showed up late, wore a hoodie, said nothing, sat leaning back, acting like it hurt him just to be present. Joylene came in behind him, hair tight, lips tighter, clutched her iced coffee like it was a prop, finally wearing black, but not out of mourning. Strategy. Ania arrived with her arms crossed and her earbuds in. Marcus told her to show some respect. She said, "She ain't even here." Oh, but I was. I saw it. Felt it. The way Randall adjusted his tie like it was a noose. The way Harold was already seated off to the side, not at the table, not behind anyone, but front-facing like he wasn't hiding no more. Randall opened the folder and began. No fanfare, no speeches, no legacy dinner bullet points. Just my voice, etched in ink. He read the statement I'd written at the top of the will. This house was built on hands, not inheritance. What I leave behind goes to who held me, housed me, helped me, not who treated me like a perch from which to claim blessings they never earned. Joylene's face? Blank. But I saw the twitch at her left eyelid. He continued, bank accounts divided evenly. Personal heirlooms assigned one by one. Jim's watch to Marcus. My mother's locket to Ania. My church hats to Sister Lily. Yes, even the red one. And then, the main event. My residence at 221 Maple Street, and the empty lot adjacent where the swing tree used to grow is left to Harold L. Harmon. My neighbor, my friend, my witness. Joylene jumped up like a party pop too loud. This is outrageous, she said. This is an ambush. She wasn't in her right mind. Randall, God bless him, didn't flinch. Tested, notarized, witnessed, psych evaluation noted in the file. She was more right than any of y'all ever gave her credit for. Caleb muttered, man, this can't be. Ania pulled one earbud out. Y'all big mad over a house none of y'all ever made a phone call into? Harold didn't move, didn't gloat, just stared forward. Then Randall pulled out what he called the final clause addendum. The thing I'd added after Joylene tried to have me declared mentally unfit. He read it slow. In the event that any named family member attempts to contest this will based on my mental capacity, I have instructed all funds tied to their benefit be instead rerouted to the Unity Garden Fund established behind the property, thereby turning resistance into results. Marcus closed his eyes. Joylene gasped. And Harold. Harold stood once, Randall was done. cleared his throat. And for the first time, he addressed them directly. "I wasn't trying to take nothing from nobody," he said. "Y'all left space open and I stood in it. Y'all left silence and I listened to it. Y'all left her empty and I sat on that porch and filled the seat." Nobody interrupted him. Because what do you say to a man who fed the soul you forgot you owed? He pulled something from his blazer. A box. Inside, my wedding ring. He set it on the table. I ain't never crossed no line, not even once, and she didn't owe me a damn thing. He looked at Marcus. "Your mama gave me that house, but she already gave y'all the rest of her, years ago." Then he stepped back. Sat down. Didn't speak again? After the meeting, Marcus followed Harold outside. "I wasn't there, but I imagine it." Marcus probably asked him how long. How long he'd loved me. How long he'd waited. How long he'd stood by the fence, watching the family he didn't belong to take turns forgetting me. And Harold probably said nothing. Or maybe he said what I imagined he would. "Your mama didn't need saving. She wanted company. You can tell the difference by who shows up." That Sunday, Harold invited Ania and a few of the neighborhood kids to the lot. Said he was building a garden in my name. Ania asked who'd plant the first row. He handed her the shovel. In the dirt, she worked quiet for 30 minutes before stopping to whisper. "She waited too long." Harold nodded. Young folks always say that. But sometimes, waiting's the only thing that proves they were worth it. I'm gone now. But as I told you from the start, what's written in ink ain't half as hard as what's carved in memory. The house is his. But the lesson's yours. The garden went up slow. Not because of time, but because of care. Harold didn't use any contractors. No landscapers. No big machinery. Just borrowed tools, oil-stained gloves, and hands that had always known how to turn earth into peace. The land behind the house stretched far enough for 5 raised beds on one side, a small walking path in the center, and a canopy swing made from old porch beams Jim once salvaged after the 1993 storm. Harold kept those woodboards for 2 decades in his shed. Because something told him they'd be needed again. You can't teach that kind of patience. Ania came by after school most days. She didn't say much. Just pulled weeds and played quiet music on a little Bluetooth speaker that buzzed when it got too close to the water hose. She was the first one to ask how Harold wanted her to list the space online. He said, "Don't list it." She looked confused. "But it's a community garden now, right?" He nodded. "So why not tell folks?" He glanced at the house. At my old porch light, still flickering at dusk by the timer Harold installed 2 weeks after the will was read. Because the right folks already know where it is. Marcus showed up on a Thursday evening. Didn't call. Didn't knock. Just walked up to the porch, sat down where I used to, and stared forward till Harold came out with 2 glasses of sweet tea. Not a word passed between them for 6 minutes. Then Marcus said, without turning his head, "I hated you for a while." Harold didn't blink. "I figured. I thought you stole something. And now." Marcus closed his eyes, sighed like he'd been holding something in since childhood. "Now, I think we gave it up before you ever asked." Harold nodded. "You want to see the garden?" They stood together, taller than most stories give room for, and walked around the side of the house. That night, they planted 1 peach tree, just offset. Marcus asked why it wasn't in line with the beds. Harold said, "So the shade lands where the next ones'll sit." And just like that, the future got its first root. Now this part, you won't like. but I told you I'd be honest from the very start. Joylene sent a letter. No stamped, no envelope, just folded and hand-delivered. Left on the rocking chair like she wasn't ready to come up the steps herself. Harold waited 3 days to read it. But he did. It said, asterisk, asterisk, I got a lot wrong. I made her legacy about property, when she'd already made it about presence. I thought love was about making sure I was remembered, but maybe it's about making sure she is. Thank you for seeing her. Through the parts we looked away from. I see it now, and I'm sorry. J asterisk asterisk. Harold folded the paper and placed it in the last drawer of my desk, next to my locket, next to my final journal, the one he opened that night. On the front page, I'd written, "Legacy has nothing to do with the house we leave behind, but everything to do with who we trusted to stand in it." Even after the world moved on. On the last page, if you're reading this and the porch light still works, that means Harold stayed. And if he stayed, you're standing in something sacred. Sit a while. Water the green beans. Turn the soil. Let my absence teach you more than my presence ever could. I'll leave you with this. Harold talks more now, but not in words. The lawn stays mowed. The gate never squeaks. The porch light is always on. Every third Saturday, kids from the neighborhood show up with gloves too big and hopes too bright, calling the garden Miss Ora Mae's place. And when they ask who she was, Harold says, "She taught me how to sit without asking when I was allowed." And that's it. That's my story. They laughed when I left them the house, cried when they learned why. But the truth is, it ain't about the crying. It's about who watered what they weren't even growing yet. And that's legacy. Not one flower. Not one funeral. Not one final word. Just the ones strong enough to stand in the storm and stay. Now I'm gonna leave y'all with this. If you watched this far, if you felt this one deep in your chest, then maybe you've been where I've been. Maybe you sat at a table wondering why nobody saw your worth until you weren't serving them no more. And if that's the case, let me tell you something my grandmama used to say. The folks who clapped the loudest at the funeral ain't always the ones who showed up when you were still living. If this story touched you, or made you think twice about who you keep close, I want you to do 3 little things for me. Sugar. First, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next real story I got waiting for you. Second, drop a comment and tell me, who's your Harold? Or maybe, who should have been? And third, share this with somebody who needs to be reminded their legacy is more than stuff. It's who shows up when you ain't got nothing left. We build this porch one story at a time, and I'm so thankful you sat with me a while tonight. Till next time, keep your light on for the ones who stay, and keep planting.